boils and ghouls. Turn out the lights and keep the popcorn coming, because it's time for another episode of Fright Fights Podcast. Fright Fights Podcast. Get ready for your gore gang. Tyler Cavan, Chris Lax, and Mike McKinney tackling horror news, reviews, and fight for their survival. Coming to you from the Fright Fights Fear Lodge. Get ready to sink your fangs into a battle that will make your blood run cold. This is Fright Fights.
Welcome to Fright Fights, the show where genre experts and enthusiasts competitively battle horror films across various topics in the genre. I'm one of your co-hosts, Tyler Cavan, and in this episode, we're taking a journey where mystery, crime, suspense, and horror intersect into the shadows. That is horror noir. Playing along with us tonight is the A24 hater, Chris Lax. How's it going, buddy?
That's me all day, babe. Doing good. Ready to battle out my horror noir film. I actually picked up a board game specifically to the film that I'm battling today. So
I wonder how
you
looked at how you play that exactly, because I saw that and I was like, do you just like watch people through out your window, or?
I'm assuming it's like Clue, where you have to figure out like who did what in what apartment.
Oh, that's cool. It is kind of like
Clue. It's pretty cool.
Nice. Yeah, I love like horror games that kind of take a homage to traditional games that kind of has a horror twist to it. So that sounds like a lot of fun. All right, and for the first time on the show, it's my pleasure to introduce our friend and weird fiction and author and co-operator of Castagnie Publishing. Is that right, Edwin?
Castagnie
Publishing. Yeah. I always add a E at the end. Edwin Callihan.
Yeah. Leave it to Tyler to fuck it
up. No, honestly, that is appropriate for the show because it's like a French derived name. It sounds like Elise,
It is, yeah. It's a French derived name.
Sweet. So it comes directly kind of into play with horror noir. And the reason we can kind of say horror noir, it mixes the genre of film noir and horror noir. And I kind of want to get Edwin's opinion of this too, because this is actually something that you chose, right?
Yeah.
Sweet. So,
I think it's a great combo of like two of the coolest kind of genre films out there.
I was really confused whenever you picked the category. I had watched recently a documentary I think it was on Shudder, called Horror Noir. And it was basically about the Black community in the horror world. And so I watched that and I put those two together. And my first choice was going to be I was going to pick like Candyman or something like that. And Tyler corrected me. He was like, no, you're thinking wrong. You watched the wrong documentary. You need to pick up something that has to deal with crime and investigators. And
right. Yeah. And that's easily confused. I think the documentary has an E at the end of noir. And then like the genre, would be just without the E.
Yeah, so it's like one of those things where, here's the thing. For me, film noir is one complete different genre than horror. And it's not really an official genre either. It's like when you like mix and blend horror with noir, it kind of comes like to, it's not really open to interpretation because I think there are strict rules, which we can discuss later on too. But I think that it's kind of like one of those things where, what exactly would you classify as like horror noir? You know what I mean? Like, we understand the differences of film noir and regular horror noir, but like, where do those lines really intersect? And that's kind of the tough.
I think it's a confusing, like it can be like a hard genre to pinpoint because you think about it, it's very fluid, it's very broad. I mean, even like nailing down films for this, I was like thinking of a list. I was like, I wonder what they're going to pick. There's not really there's not really a lot, you know what I mean? So yeah, it's kind of like it's a weird genre that's really not been. It's kind of like horror westerns, like they just like haven't really been explored to their full potential yet.
As its own
A
genre.
lot of the films too in the category is a lot of the older titles. Like you can classify most of the movies from the 30s, 40s, and 50s in that category just because of the way that filmmaking was perceived back then, the way that it was done. And as you know, my choice, Rear Window, Alfred Hitchcock. Almost all the movies that he did could probably be considered horror noir.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh yeah, 100% agree. I'm trying to actually let me pull it up here real quick because the for my choice, I'm not going to reveal it quite yet, but the producer and director and cinematographer actually kind of were the founders of horror noir, because horror noir wasn't really necessarily, or even film noir to begin with, wasn't necessarily something that was like meant to happen. It was something that was more so like coined towards critics in like France. So it's just kind of like one of those things, like in like French filmmaker history, you look at kind of like the dark kind of, I guess you would compare it to, where I'm trying to go with this is like you think about like Bauhaus style artwork and like different kind of like German expressionism and all that kind of stuff, and you put that into kind of this like crushing black, and like I guess like film noir actually translates to like what, like dark film or something like that. My film school, Tyler, because I actually whenever I went to film school, one of the very first things that they do before I dropped out, by the way, is they actually go over a complete thing of film noir and kind of like the history of it, where it all started in the 40s. But essentially, it was kind of like you take a cross section of like universal monsters, which is really big throughout the late 20s to the early 40s, especially throughout the 30s. And you intersect that with something that like France was trying to do with these like crushing blacks, kind of like the femme fatale, which was not even the femme fatale at the time, and kind of like respond to that through a very low budget B movie kind of lens. And you put that out there and the critics see it and they're like, well, you know, they're doing something very specific with this style of filmmaking, right? They're trying to really have a certain look. And the guy, let me see, it's actually like Nicholas, is it Musaraka or Musaragua? One of those two pronunciations. Again, French. But at the end of the day, he was actually one of the founders who kind of like put that kind of like Bauhaus style of filmmaking to it, kind of like those like weird shapes, abstract kind of like look. So I think that that's always something that you can look for in very early film noir and say like, hey, you know, this is a trademark, is the look of it, the way it, the shadows, the light. And that's something that my director, and the reason I chose my film was kind of, I first came out like with the idea of choosing that film just strictly because of that style.
So, for both of you guys, what is the main subject matter that classifies horror noir for you guys? Because for me personally, I take consideration anything that has to deal with like a police investigation where they're the main focal point, or like an investigator where there's a mystery that happens and those are the lead people trying to figure out what's going on. That's how I interpreted the category. But what do you guys think? What's the classification that you guys have for it?
I think a heavy weigh in on moral ambiguity, with like a main character kind of facing existential crises. But like you said, the archetypes come into play. Like there has to be a mystery, there has to be a femme fatale, there has to be a procedure, like a private investigator, a cop, you know. But the main character always has to be faced with like a moral question, and what's like motivating them isn't necessarily the right thing or the wrong thing, you know. So I think morality is a big play, and the archetypes of the characters themselves.
Oh, no, yeah, and I agree with that 100%, because whenever it comes down to that moral ambiguity that you were talking about, it's definitely becomes formulaic later on, right? Like through like whenever Hitchcock was making his films, especially, it just comes down to like, you know, it's a trademark, you know what I mean, of that. But whenever it first was started, it was more just the look. So we went from like a look and then we develop the rules of the genre or the subgenre, right?
Both movies that we chose, your choice and my choice, both have that aspect in it. But the main character in both of them has a dilemma of some sort of is this the right decision? Is the wrong decision? And ultimately, based on what happens with whatever mystery they're confined with, determines whether it was right or wrong. So, I mean, yeah, that's definitely one of the major aspects of it.
And I think that one thing I will say before we even think about the films is I think that the three films that we're going to be battling today really does kind of capture a wide array of film noir. We go from early roots to more classic film noir to like a neo noir, which I think that the three really encapsulates the genre really well. So I am glad. Although, spoiler alert, I am very pissed that we did not choose Invasion of the Body Snatchers. I'm kind of pissed that we didn't choose Diabolique. There's so many movies. Like Edwin said, it's just like you can look at it different ways to where it's super difficult to even pinpoint, hey, what movie would you choose for horror noir or crime horror? And then it kind of goes, there's so many movies you could kind of classify as film noir. Where do you begin? And I think that we have a really good jumping off point. I don't know if you guys would agree with that.
Yeah, I think this is a good trifecta, and I think what you're saying about kind of placement in Hollywood filmmaking, you've got your choice, definitely rooted in that old style of picture making, and then Chris's choice is just classic Hollywood cinema. I mean, at its finest peak, and then and then straight up neo horror noir as it gets.
So I guess Edwin, I will ask, because as this being your choice and we got to talk about it a little bit on there, what kind of like got you initially into horror? Because I mean, we've known each other now for what, like a little over 2 years, and we've spoken about horror at length. And I mean, you can tell you're absolutely horror fiend. I mean, horror writer, everything about you just like radiates, very like horror expert, I guess you would say. So kind of like what was the beginning roots for you whenever you first kind of got into the genre?
I get asked this quite a few times too, and I think I tell a different story every time. So, but like I have these, these nostalgic memories of things that like really got me into kind of like the macabre in general. I was terrified of horror as a kid, so I was always like hiding behind the recliner when my family was watching Halloween, or I was terrified of killer clowns from outer space, like absolutely terrified. And then I got older and started getting into monster movies and stuff with my grandpa. Watched Twilight Zone a lot, and picked up Stephen King at a young age, and it kind of just spiraled from there. And then as I got older, I always loved horror films and stuff, and read horror fiction and comic books. But then, like in college, I guess I got to this point where I was like, I really like all this stuff, but I never really called it horror. I never really got into the culture. I went to school for art and philosophy. I was like huge into philosophy, and then kind of that merged from there. And I started reading horror fiction and watching a fuck ton of horror movies, and it just turned into this. And now that's all I do. that's all I think about. So it's just one of those things that kind of just snowballed over my life and then brought me to this point.
I mean, hell yeah. I mean, that's.
But I love hearing the stories, because every single horror fan has a different story, and it's so weird to hear what got somebody started and where they originated it at. And so I do have to ask you, Edwin, what is your favorite horror film of all time? Because that will be, knowing that answer is like an insight of like who you are.
Man, that's like a really, really hard question. And I don't really like to answer it because I could say a million different movies. But at this point in my life, I would say, Prince of Darkness, John Carpenter's Prince of Darkness is like probably my all-time favorite horror movie. But then, I love like Halloween is the first horror movie I ever sat down and watched in its entirety. And I like to this day, like I remember watching it for the first time and being like, whoa, that was insane. Like I thought it was just, like a hack and slash movie to be scared of as a kid. And then when I saw it, I was like, there's something more in there. So yeah, those are like kind of my two answers, but I mean, and I got a whole list of movies that I could go through and say are my favorite horror movies. So I mean, like, it bounces around. I love Fulci's The Beyond.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just it's a really heavy question. So yeah. Those are I guess my rounded.
Yeah, all three of those are great. I mean, The Beyond with that, there's like that maggot tornado. Is that the one I'm thinking of, or is that The Gates of Hell? Which one is that one? Isn't there like a big storm of like maggots that fly, on that one, Carolyn, I can't even think of her name. Yeah, the Beyond though, that's Fulci's one of the greatest films that Fulci's made.
Yeah, it's the Gates of Hell like trilogy. So it's what is it? The Beyond, House by the Cemetery,
City of the Living Dead,
City of the Living Dead.
Yeah,
three fantastic films, and that's kind of like how I am too, Edwin. It's just like impossible. Whenever I get asked, like, "Hey, what's your favorite horror movie of all time?" Because the first thing people always ask is like, "Hey, oh, you love film? What's your favorite movie?" kind of thing. And it comes on the point where I'm like, "Here's my like." They have this idea of like a handshake five. Like, what are the 5 films? Whenever you like first meet somebody that you can say like, "Hey, these are my 5." It's like not my favorite, but these are like my 5 films I like, I love, like I watch,
Yeah, I mean? Yeah, for sure.
So it's always like one of those kind of things with me too. All right, well, sweet. Well, I mean, you're kind of familiar with the podcast, Edwin. So I'm gonna recap the rules just to make sure that we got it. But I think it's gonna be like a lot of fun. I really do. So basically, I'm gonna have 3 different films here. I'm gonna introduce one. Chris is gonna introduce one, and then Mike, which is not here, picking the longest fucking movie too, of course, is going to be going last. And we'll just kind of like discuss it, and then what you'll do.
Fuck you, Mike.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Fuck you, Mike. Come on. What the hell's going on here? And what we'll do at the end is we'll just kind of eliminate it down. You'll pick 3rd place, 2nd place, 1st place, and and we'll chat. So my first film, I'll go first. So the first film is going to be from 1942. We're looking at Jacques Tourneu's Cat People.
Across the centuries comes this exciting story of a modern girl cursed by an ancient legend. The legend of the Cat People. Women whose kiss means death, whose love turns them into vicious, snarling beasts of prey.
Now, I want to say that this was one of the very first films. Again, I wanted to talk about my film school experience because before I dropped out and decided not to do it, I actually love the quote from the director that was shown to us on the screen. I actually pulled it here because I think this is absolutely, for any kind of young filmmaker out there or somebody who really like is just into like classic cinema, it really kind of like makes you inspired to want to make something immediately, which we all love. So Jacques Tourneur says, cinema for success in cinema for anyone, any job, is directly linked to your love of the theater. Anyone who loves it passionately, anyone who can adore cinema, and for who lives it, can never be stopped. They'll make it. So it's just kind of like one of those things. It's just like, if you really truly believe in cinema, you're going to make it at the end of the day. And that's kind of like what happened to him with Cat People, because the people he collaborated with to make this film was super low budget. And this kind of came at a time in Hollywood where, again, as a response to Universal Monsters, RKO, Val Lewton himself, which is Jacques Tourneur, gets together, comes up with a script essentially, and they are able to pull it off. And I mean, like, it's obviously considered one of the most classic films of all time. Now, I would go as far as say, the sequel, of course, goes a little bit more into the, I guess you'd say, voyeurism of what they're trying to do with the original. But you have to think this was of a time of exact, how would you say it? It's almost like very reclusive in terms of what they could and could not show. There's like at moments throughout this like the film where you see what is it, Irina, and she's like really trying to like push this almost like sexual frustration directly into Oliver. So you see basically at the opening scene, Irina, which is our
I was gonna say it starts off really quickly with that.
Yeah, it's just like I want to mention that too, because that was actually be part of the discussion. So I guess we could start there, honestly, without even talking anymore. We can just walk through the entire film. Because if you look at the first like 10 minutes, it's kind of crazy how fast it moves. And I was thinking at one point, I'm like, is this covering the period of like 3 days? Is this like a Romeo and Juliet situation? Or is this like multiple months? But then if you like watch it,
I thought it was an overnight. Like I literally thought it was an overnight thing. Like they meet and the next day they're in love with each other.
It kind of does happen like that. But again, that's I think part of this kind of like voyeurism that the film is trying to do. But I mean, it does mention, I think, a couple times that like a month's passed or a few months has passed. So I'm thinking the way I'm interpreting it is that they meet and they kind of just like fall in love rather quickly, but I think it's over the course of a couple months or maybe like a month or something, which is still pretty fast.
Yeah. And it's good to note that the movie itself is like just barely over an hour long too. So the fact that everything happens so quickly and it's such a short film feels even quicker than what it actually is as well.
That's one thing I love about old cinema like this is that most of the movies they were always under 90 minutes most of the time, unless they were like some kind of epic. But horror movies in particular barely went over an hour for the most part. I mean, you look at like Nosferatu, you look at Frankenstein, you look at all the Universal stuff and all the RKO stuff. I mean, another movie by fucking Jacques Turner and Val Lewton, I Walked with a Zombie. That movie's like literally like 70 minutes long. You know what I mean? I think the short duration of the film allows them to kind of push the story a lot faster, and you kind of get into it better, and it cuts out all the filler. So there's really just like no filler. They just like get you right into the movie and you're already cracking into the lore.
Exactly. And I think that also a big thing is they had to shoot these on actual film. And these all being B movies, like Universal was not the studio that it was today. Like Universal was making films that was super low budget and they were barely, scraping by. The Monsters honestly kind of saved the studio from going under at one point. And then we have RKO, which kind of just followed in the footsteps of Universal at that point. And they were trying to make these like quick turnover, like, super fast films. And I think that it kind of came down to just time, money, and resources. And I mean, I don't know how, I know it's very expensive to show a film. And back then the film was even more expensive than when it comes out to like, today, because it was just much, much rarer. They didn't make near as much of it. So then it kind of comes on the runtime, which I kind of think it works. If it went any longer, I don't know if it. Here's the thing, though. I hate bringing the remake into this because I think that it's not really a fair comparison. But the remake, it works incredibly well too. I love the 1980s.
I do too.
So yeah, I mean, I think that that's one thing. And I want to mention this before we go too far away from it. Talking about the 80s version, because I know that the guy who actually did the cinematography for the 80s version watched the 40s version and was able to consult with some of the people who had known the guy, because I mean the guy's passed away that did the original cinematography, but they were like, what were you trying to do? But censorship issues, obviously they weren't even allowed. I made a note here because there was actually something that I saw. They weren't even allowed to like show their bare chest, like men weren't. There was like moments where they had to like stay like 2 to 3 feet apart, and they had like measuring tapes, making sure that the men would stay far enough away from the women, because the viewers were being repulsed by like the fact that like they would see something sensual happening on screen. And obviously like after the war and stuff, a lot of that stuff came a little bit easier. Like it was much easier to not have as much censorship at that point. But the 80s version was able to, everything that they wanted to do in the 40s version they had to hold back with, the 80s version just kind of took it and ran. You know what I mean? So if you watch the 80s version, what I'm trying to say is you can kind of see what the 40s version was wanting to do. You know what I mean? You guys get I don't know if you guys have seen the 80s version. You have Edwin, right?
Yeah. It definitely expands on the lore, and I mean, the '80s one is able to touch on like incest and sexuality in a lot more ways than that was more implied. Uh, Things that could be implied rather than actually shown in the original RKO film.
Yeah. Which I mean, I want to say that like it's pretty apparent though from the very first scene. Like we have like Irina is like sketching, like fashion sketching this picture of this leopard, and Oliver just kind of comes up behind her and she's like, "Please fuck me," is essentially like what she's
Yeah.
saying at one point. It's just like,
Yeah.
"Let's go back to your place," and that
I mean,
like,
wouldn't you if somebody's drawing a panther? I mean,
yeah, turns me on, but yeah, it's fucking like it's just so apparent there. But then she has this thing where she gets cold feet because she realizes that she's gonna, turn into, I guess you'd say, a leopard, a cat person, however you want to interpret that. But it's saying so
I
much more.
I was a little confused when it first started because we get about 15-20 minutes into it, and you see that she's put off by wanting to do anything with him really or be around him too much. But they don't really go in and just blatantly say this is what's going to happen. It's kind of like piece by piece until she talks to the doctor. The doctor explains this is why you feel this way. And I was like, within the first like 20 minutes, I was confused. I was like, why does she feel this way? Why does she have these feelings of like not wanting to be around him until we get like literally to the doctor saying this is why you're doing this?
I think the movie, I mean, in general, both films, but we're talking about the first one. It's especially more apparent in the first one that the whole thing is about Irina's kind of sexual regression, and her fear of sex in general. That's it's her fear of intimacy is what the whole kind of the whole gist is that's going on. And that fear is not just inherited out of nowhere. It's like familial. It's something that has, plagued the women in her lineage for generations. It's a curse.
Mm-hmm.
It's like sex bad. And then that's kind of how it was. Back then. It's like that. The whole film is just subversive because in the senses it's ironic because the film is implying a lot of sexual regression without actually coming out and saying it. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, so the woman's afraid of sex, we're just gonna go send her to a shrink. You know what I mean?
Hey, that's like great. That's actually really funny that you mentioned that because it's just like any kind of psychology you see in horror films or film in general before, I think the 1990s was whenever people started taking psychology remotely serious. Anything before that's just like, let's give her a lobotomy. I think that would work.
Right. Right.
You know what I mean? So any kind of time, I mean, I laugh at that because it's just so like it's fucking barbaric that we would even think to do that. But if you see in the 1940s style films or even 50s, 60s, 70s, hell, even some of the, I mean, I would go as far to say is up to the early 80s, you see them almost like gaslighting women into like believing something that's completely untrue for the benefit of the man in film. And it's just like, hey, yeah, just send her to a shrink kind of thing. I love that. I just want to mention that because it's just absolutely ridiculous throughout. And she goes like multiple times, and the guy's just like, "Yeah, we think basically you should kind of have sex with your husband. What are you feeling? How are you feeling?"
Yeah. Well, want to point it out that she actually only goes once, and the next time the doctor comes to her.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
He just wanted to help out. I don't know what else I could say. But okay, so I have a couple scenes I wanted to mention throughout too that I really, really love because the scene, there was one particular scene where they're talking about this figure, and Irina has it in her house, and I forgot what it was exactly. It's called something. I don't know if you guys know, but essentially it's like depicting this like medieval or like 16th century, maybe even style like king, and it's like it's being impelled by like a cat sitting there, and it's being impelled by like a sword, and it kind of like tells a broad scope of like almost like I guess would it be like demonology in a way? It has like demonic presences to it. There were spiritual ideas and concepts surrounding it. And it kind of like insinuates that Irina is not really part of a cult, but it almost like appears that way as they're at dinner one night and she's sitting there and this cat woman esque
Oh
woman
man, I
comes in.
love that scene, man.
I
That
fucking
scene
love
is
that
so
scene.
weird, and like it's so weird and vague because you don't really like it's like there's just this mysterious cat lady, cat-ish type lady that comes in and she's like dropping these hints about Irina, and
Yeah.
Irina's like, get the fuck out of here, like don't fuck this up,
I'm trying to get like
And,
that's the thing
and
is she's
they
like
call
Irina
her cat
wants
lady
it so
too.
bad, but she just I mean obviously she can't do it because she's a fucking cat, first of all. But I'm sorry, Chris. I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, I'm just gonna say that they actually like she's known in the area as the cat lady. Like I wasn't sure why she's called the cat lady. Like, does she own a lot of cats, or do people think she turns into a cat? Is that like a common thing there? Like, I don't know.
Well, at the very beginning, who says there's a quote at the very beginning here that I wrote down too as I was watching it, because it stuck directly out to me, not only for film noir, but kind of it alludes from the very beginning that Irene is kind of a cat. She has a quote that says, "I like the dark, it's friendly." And if you think about that, it's like, okay, well, cats are kind of reclusive. Cats are, to themselves. And it kind of hints to this more of a, I guess, mystery of Irina's background. And why does she have this, I don't know, like 400-year-old statue at the time? And I think that it doesn't really go into the lore. And there's not a lot of people who talk about this, the lore of it. But I think that it really kind of alludes that Irina comes from this like cursed cult. You know what I mean? And I know
Yeah, there's like almost like a folk-ish nature of the background for Irina.
yeah.
I definitely think it's cultish,
I think the 80s film kind of goes a little bit more into detail about it too, which I do appreciate. But in this one, I mean, it does a great job of kind of keeping that mystery. So that there was that scene though I wanted to mention because I fucking love that scene. I'm glad you guys like it too. There's one where Alice Moore, which is the woman that's hooking up with Oliver on the side, she's leaving work. And as she's leaving work, she goes down to dinner with Oliver, and there's a parallel with the lighting and suspense that kind of like goes together whenever she's getting in the bus. Remember I'm talking about like the bus scene? And then she's like kind of like overly paranoid. Like it's a scene that's haunted by paranoia. And I love the look of that. And that's kind of like how I get like the kind of like the Bauhaus kind of style. Because you see like the architecture, the crazy German expressionistic kind of concept of the lighting, the set design, the suspense, which is Hitchcockian at that point. Everything
Yeah,
that
and that's like a
encapsulates.
first jump scare too. That's that early jump scare with the bus coming by when she's freaking out walking to the bus stop. It's one of those scenes probably in the theater. People were like, "Whoa, what the fuck?"
I mean, definitely, especially in the 40s, that's 100% there. But so I think that one trademark of this I would also wanted to talk about was the fact that I mean, obviously, RKO makes it in response to the Universal monsters, and I think it has a very specific. This is kind of like a great entry point to horror noir, I guess you would say, because in this film particularly, you look at it and it kind of has this very certain particular look, like I've been talking about. So there was one scene where a lamp falls off on the floor. You know what I'm talking about? The scene where like they just keep acting like Irina gets like angry, I think it is, and she like throws it off in the floor, and they're sitting there like yelling at each other, and it's completely dark, and they only like kind of depend on that one singular light source, and it gets so fucking dark in some points of it where you can't even tell what's even going on around the actors, and they just kind of keep going with it. And I think that's something that, we talk about film noir being like, a dark kind of stylistic film, almost as if it's like a artistic choice. And I think that whenever you see something like that in Cat People, it also kind of validates that. It kind of like, opens up that world of film noir. Whenever you see the different, sets, the different architecture throughout, the choices they make with lighting and all of that. So I think that that's something that you definitely could see is saying, hey, this film very clearly has strong noir roots. And I think that in terms of like a femme fatale, I think that Irina is a great femme fatale. I mean, I think that if you want to talk about, I don't think at the point femme fatales were even necessarily established as a character in film, but I think whenever you see Irina, that's just a perfect definition of what you would expect femme fatale to be. I mean, she's beautiful at the time too. Like, I mean, absolutely gorgeous.
And you get a real good sense of that too in the swimming pool scene when, you see the shadows working around the pool. You don't know if you see something or not. And then it's immediately interrupted at the end of it by Irina coming in at the last moment, telling him, "Oh, I'm sorry, did I startle you?" Like something like that. She's really good with that.
Dude, I
Yeah, that
love that
scene
swimming pool
rocks.
scene too. That is one of my
Yeah,
favorites.
yeah.
And it's
There's
not
something interesting about how Irina changes too from as a femme fatale. She at the beginning she's very innocent and sweet seeming, and you're kind of tricked, to think that you're on her side, that she's not, basically the antagonist of the film, and towards the end, you get to that pool scene and she's full on like embraced her primitive, cat people, destiny.
She just embraced the fact that she's a cat. No, what I mean,
Yeah.
let's talk about the ending here because I think that we're heading that perfect direction too. So that there's the pool scene, and then afterwards we see Irina eventually. After a few more, there's a couple more scenes after that, but skipping ahead to Irina getting to what is it, Central Park, the zoo, and she steals the key from the groundskeeper there, which they've had some exchanges before, and I think he's kind of like on to her like primitive side, as everyone was talking about. I think he kind of knows, like he seems like he's kind of cool with it, like he's like, you're here taking like these sketches of the panther. If you want to just hang out here, you could do it whenever you want, is essentially kind of like what he offers her, it seems like. And she takes his key, lets the panther out. Panther gets hit by a car at the very end. So I was kind of curious.
I laughed. I laughed really hard at that film or that scene. Like she lets it out, it runs across the street, jumps over a ledge, and immediately gets hit by a car. Like I felt so sorry for it. Like it was like, I'm free, clunk.
Well, Chris, honestly, this is before PETA or the Humane Society or anything existed. So you wonder, how was the treatment of these animals on set? Did they kill a panther? You know what I mean? Like, what happened?
Yeah, don't you get to see the panther's body too after it gets hit?
Yes.
And it looks real. Like, and I think I wondered the same thing. I'm like, man, I bet they actually killed a fucking panther for that movie back then. And I mean that shit didn't even change until like that one movie where what's his name killed all the horses in the 80s, and that one epic horror movie that was like one of the biggest box office bombs. Anyways, yeah, animals were treated pretty shitty back then in films.
Well, dude, have you ever seen what is it, Wake and Fright? That's one of my favorite movies. And
oh yeah,
they're in the back and they have a bunch of kangaroos hopping around. And if you watch it, like if you just watch it, it's like, okay, yeah, no, they're just killing kangaroos or whatever. But then you find out, no, they were actually killing kangaroos. And whenever you watch it, almost is heartbreaking because these animals, I mean, I guess they are a dime a dozen in Australia, but still, I mean, they're like murdering these animals on screen, like fucking like shooting them. And they don't kill just a couple. Like, I mean, they kill a bunch. And it makes you wonder, like, did they kill a panther for, cat people? Because it seemed like they fucking killed a panther. You know what I mean? But at the same time,
you never know, man.
I mean, you see... You see that the camera is one shot too. The camera like is sideways and it shows the panther jumping on top of the ledge, and then it slowly pans as the panther jumps down, and you hear the car, and then the camera pans down as you see the panther under the car. So I don't know. Did they?
I mean, we'll have to send an email and ask, see what's going on. But I think that, I mean, the idea of the panther getting hit by the car. Almost the way I interpret it is, it's kind of like Irina's, relationship is over, and she's kind of embraced this like primitive side, but like it's like the old her is dead. Is kind of the way I took it, at least. I don't know if you guys kind of read it that way or not.
I thought it was going to be like an outlet for a cover up of the murder, because they have this escaped panther. The professor dies by the attack of a panther. They put two and two together and they say the panther did it. It's dead now. Nobody's going to be arrested because it was an accidental murder from an animal. So an animal attack.
So I mean, I dug it though. I mean, I think that this film, it'll be Edwin's ranking at the end, but I mean, this is, I think, top tier, 10 out of 10 style of.
There's one scene I have to talk about because it's real small, but it was really funny. So there's the scene where he goes and buys her a cat, and the cat doesn't like her. Like, it hisses at her, won't let her pick her up, and they immediately walk back to the pet store. And he's like, "I'm here to exchange this cat for a canary." And he's like, "Okay, come on in." And they walk in. They place the cat on the table. She grabs the canary, puts it in a bag, and hands it to him. Like, is the exchange rate the same price going for a cat and a canary back in the 40s?
Maybe it was.
I mean, also, I would have mentioned while you're bringing that scene up, it's kind of funny because they had just went on like one single date, and I'm like, dude, you're gonna buy a cat for this woman just after the second date, and you already kind of alluded to the fact that she is kind of like fucking crazy about cats in a weird way.
They moved quick back then.
I mean,
yeah, they did, didn't they?
Arranged marriage, man. All right.
Yeah, one thing about the movie, though, and this can go for both movies that we're talking about tonight, is, especially back then, each scene is a lot of talking. And when you have really good actors that can give you that much information in one scene, you can't take your eyes off the film. Like, you're intrigued. You want to know more, even though they just literally talked for 10 minutes straight. You're interested, you're invested. And I think this movie really did that well with playing on what information they're giving you and the characters that they're giving you, with like the two characters talking about just random things, but you're invested because they're doing it so well.
Yeah, and I think that kind of also comes down to, like, they trim the fat, like their running time, it being only 70 minutes long. You look down to it, it's just like, well, they had to, their relationship had to move kind of quick. The way that the film goes is quick. Everything about it just, there's no, it's like, what it reminds me of? Reanimator from, what is it, like 83 or whatever. There's not 1 ounce of fat on that movie, and it just zooms from beginning to end, and you're just like, man, this goes like super fucking fast. I think that's kind of like what
you mentioned earlier at the beginning. You said that quote from Val Lewton about the theater. And I think that applies to especially the first 2 films we're talking about. And you mentioned Reanimator, and the reason I thought of that is because when Gordon made Reanimator, he came from theater. So that's why that movie moves so quick. And there's no fat because they rehearse that shit, and it's just literally meant to be like on a stage. And I think both the first 2 films in the show tonight, they are almost, back then it was like theater and film weren't too far off from each other. And everything from the set design and the way the lighting is done, it's very meticulous. The dialogue moves the story. I mean, it's not like it's not like a John Cassavetes movie where people are just talking just a fucking jaw. The dialogue moves the story in this, and every second counts. So I think that's important too. There's just a way to keep the focus and keep you entertained and really deliver on the plot of the film.
Yeah, that's very. I'm just thinking about that because it is very interesting, and yeah, I wonder if that is it, because back whenever they were making Cat People and right before that, cinema had only been around in narrative form, at least, because they had obviously German Expressionism kind of was like the first wave of narratives coming in, and right before that was kind of just like, hey, let's do like a George Méliès style film where we're just telling very short, quick stories. But then we have like the movies of the 40s, obviously like Citizen Kane comes in and people are like, what the hell? This is a technical achievement. But you look at it and it's all very, very much like a very fine-tuned stage play almost. And I think it's just maybe also because that's the kind of storytelling they were used to at the time. You know what I mean? We're like fucking changed so much now, and like 2023 here we set, and you see the kind of movies that we have coming out, and mainstream Hollywood today is definitely not what it used to be. Of course we have like some like indie films. I'm not trying to criticize indie films of any kind, but I'm just saying like, things have changed so much from what they used to be, and the way we tell stories are. And I think that a lot of times you look at these old films from the 1940s, 1930s, and it's just immediately kind of written off like, hey, it's black and white. The narratives is, it's not good storytelling. The way the camera, the cinematography is not very good. And there's a lot of complaints by like a lot of people that just casually watch movies or doesn't want to watch a movie for like, narrative value. And you look back at these films from like 100 years ago, and you're like, well, you have to understand what kind of fucking achievement was that at the point. You know what I mean? What kind of like thing did they have to go through to get this made? How hard was it? And the lights, even down to the fucking lights, were like what, 150 degrees at times. Like they were saying Suspiria, which is like 30 years after Cat People was made, 40 years after. They're like, it got so hot on that set at times it approached over 100 degrees, and like Dario Argento was like fucking like sweating. Everybody was like fucking sweating. Like their makeup was like melting off their face. It was so hot. So it's just, I mean, brava to them. I could not do Hollywood back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no way.
All right, well, Chris.
This was a first time watch. Yeah, this was a first time watch for me. I'd heard it and I've seen the scene before, the swimming pool scene we talked about. It pops up in a lot of people's lists for really scary and creepy moments. So I've always wanted to see it, and I'm glad you picked it because I finally got a chance to check it out. And Edwin said it best earlier when he said the dialogue moves the movie, and it really does. And that's what really invested me into this movie was the dialogue part of it. I didn't care about about what was going to happen with the scene to see like what am I looking for here? The effects. I don't care about the effects. I wasn't looking to see, a cat person or anything. I was just invested in these two characters and what they had to say to each other. And I was really, really into it. I gave this movie a 7 out of 10.
I mean, if I was going to rate it, I would probably go easily 9 out of 10. Like, I mean, we'll save Edwin's though. I don't want. I'm trying to.
I'm not gonna spill the beans yet.
I don't want. Yeah, the beans cannot be spilled to us because I want. I mean, I'm fighting for Cat People here. I mean, that's what we're doing. Chris, hit us with your film. What do you got?
So Alfred Hitchcock's Rear Window, and this one is from 1954, I believe.
This is the scene of the crime. A crime of passion, filmed in a way you have never seen before, and as no one else would dare attempt, but the screen's master of suspense, the producer-director who shocked the world with Psycho.
And this one takes the main character who has been injured in I want to say like a photography accident. It's kind of hard to say. He was injured in a photography accident. So he has a broken leg and he's got a cast that covers from his foot up through his hip. So he can't really move. He's stuck in a wheelchair. He is living in an apartment complex that has an open view window for his back room. And it looks out a bunch of other open view windows too in the other other apartments across the yard. And so he's stuck there all day, just all night, watching other people do their daily routines. And he just happens to see and hear things that he think might be a murder. So he starts investigating with himself and with his I guess girlfriend, and then calls a police detective to help out and everything. And you don't know whether it's something that that really happened, he really saw it, or you're right there with him. You're learning these things as he learns these things. So you don't know if it's in his head, if he's just trying to make something out of nothing. And it really puts you in the mood of, what's going on. Like you're in the mystery. You're right there with it. This was also another first time watch for me, and I'm glad that I picked this one out as well. What did you guys think of Rear Window?
Oh, I fucking love it, man. I think it's a near perfect movie, to be honest. It's concise. It's just to the point. There's really not much of a dull moment. It's another one of those films that are it's almost like a play. Like even the sets, they look so vivid and rich, and the color, the Technicolor is so rich, and even down to Grace Kelly's fucking blonde hair. It's just awesome film.
I was gonna bring up the actual set because you said it looks like a play or it plays out like a play, and it really does. I actually had a hard time deciding if it was actually filmed on a stage, like on a set. They built that set, or was it actually filmed at a apartment complex that they just were able to rent out? Like,
it's all a set. Yeah, it's all a set. They built a whole set. So all that it's basically a giant play that you're watching someone else watch other people in. So it's like there's this very just big channel of voyeurism invested into the film too, and that's just I guess that's a common Hitchcock motif. It's very just a solid fucking film. I really do love this movie.
And I mean, I'll add to that because I remember first hearing that whenever it was filmed completely on a set, and it was only because Hitchcock had correct me if I'm wrong, Edwin, about this, but Hitchcock had like a very specific look to how he wanted the apartments to have a layout with that courtyard, and they tested so many different areas, and he was not happy with any of them. And the only thing they could do is just resort to building it, which I think was just fucking crazy. I mean, this thing is huge. Like these apartments are beautifully done. And I thought for a minute, I forget sometimes how meticulous Hitchcock is with his, I mean, he's the master of suspense, yes, but with his style of filmmaking and how Technicolor kind of plays into a lot of his later films, I didn't know if it was just my Blu-ray I was watching, but it looks so fucking good. Like it looks, I don't even know how to describe. Like, I mean, the colors is like Argento-esque at times. Like it's just like bold colors. And there was this moment, it reminded me almost like A Place in the Sun, with the sunset landscape in the back, and like it was this like glowing orange, and you just see, all these shots of people living their life. And as you kind of look around, you're just like, man, this thing just is dazzling. You could just you honestly just feel like you're with him. You know what I mean? You feel like you're with him watching them.
Yeah, could you imagine the choreography it took to get everybody in their spots, what they need to do, when they need to do it, when the camera has to move from one spot to the next? Because there's a lot of shots that are stationary shots where the camera just pans up or pans down to different people doing different things. And I mean, it was really intriguing. I think the filmmaking aspect of this movie was just one of the most interesting things about the film.
I think the set itself, the set design itself is almost like a character in the film. And so that's something I really like. I like when the setting, like even down to the fact that there is this heat wave going on and everything's really hot and it's adding to the suspense. It's like making everyone, on edge. The setting itself is almost this antagonistic character, kind of, playing on James Stewart, like it's driving him to the edge, and he's stuck there in his wheelchair, and it's just the whole really it's not even the murder that's happening that is really going against him. It's the set and the setting that's really everything around him is coming against him and antagonizing him and kind of pushing him over the edge.
Dude, I'm so glad you said that too, because I wrote an article once, and it was talking about how the house can play a main character in a horror film. You know what I mean? So like
100%, yeah, for sure.
It almost becomes like its own kind of, like as you said, antagonist. It becomes its own killer, and you see like films like Rear Window. I just had mentioned Suspiria, Amityville Horror. All these films where the actual house itself, I mean, Possession, that fucking like movie from 1980, that house, the apartment she moved into, it just feels achy. You know what I mean? So there's something about having that grandscape around, and not only that, but it kind of is like a social commentary as well, because not only are you getting these crazy ass like sets and like this beautiful technicolor, and you're getting this whole entire like atmosphere for James Taylor, and you feel like you're really watching again like voyeuristic almost into people's life, and you're kind of like getting almost like this connection with them, but you're also seeing so many different like walks of life. Like you're seeing like people falling in love, you're seeing lonely people, you're seeing people who are suffering more than others. You're really kind of like getting this very personal view. So not only are you getting James Stewart and but fucking what, I forgot his character's name for some reason, but James Stewart as the main character, and seeing his life, but you're actually living through like other people as well. You know what I mean? It kind of has that reclusiveness again.
Yeah.
Yes,
and you're
definitely.
rooting for him the entire time. You want people to believe him. Like I was wanting people to believe him because he's a likable character. You believe everything that he's saying is truthful. Like you don't think that he's lying about anything. And you see his girlfriend and you want her to believe him, and then eventually she's on board. And then his what a housekeeper, whatever that lady is that comes and helps her, she has her own unique style too, but then she's on board, and they're all working together, and it just makes you like the situation that's happening, and you want it to be in his favor. You want things to play out in his turn. And that's another reason why I like the movie too.
Yeah, I think what Hitchcock can do in a movie like this with what he uses is minimalism, or I guess makes you think it's minimal, but really there is so much going on. Like you were talking about panning to different scenes going on in the apartments. Each one of those pieces, is like moving a pawn to the next element of the story. Kind of driving Jeff or James Stewart's character over the edge. And I mean, he really doesn't have anything to do but be obsessed with what's going on around him. And that's what it kind of boils down to, is obsession. And Hitchcock is really able to pull off that human experience, that human emotion of obsession. I mean, you see it through all his films. But I think the way he kind of draws on obsession, boredom to obsession is really, really fascinating in this film. And it's weird because it's not really scary. You're not really scared, but you're definitely feeling anxiety. You're feeling more anxiety than Jeff, because you're like, oh man, no one believes this fucking guy. You're the only one that believes him. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You're the only one that's on his side.
And I want to say too, speaking of like Hitchcock, he does have a very particular style of filmmaking in terms of like suspense. I mean, but if you look at this film, I don't know how maybe your guys' opinion on this, but do you guys feel like the suspense in this is a little bit different than his other films? Like it almost feels like long, like for example, like long takes. Like this one, you feel like it really just spends time going from apartment to apartment, like we had mentioned before, and maybe I guess isolation into your house. And you kind of Hitchcock's films, I mean, like he has trademarks in his films that do that, but this scene, it felt different. Did you guys feel that way?
Yes, 100%. I mean, you look at films like Rope. Rope has a lot of harsh Dutch angles in it. You look at a film like Psycho even. I mean, they're totally, this Rear Window that's what I mean. It's like his almost it's his masterpiece, I think and he does a very different approach. It's a much more I don't know if the word would be mainstream, but it's a much more relatable approach on a broad scale, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they've used the same scenario, the same story throughout horror films since this movie, because you get stuff like Disturbia, Bright Night, Secret Window. All these films take the same type of plot of, something's happening next door. You think you see the killer, and it plays upon that story on there. And I think Hitchcock obviously did it the best, but if you can take a story like this and be the first to do it, and it carries throughout the ages of horror film, you've made something good.
I think that this might be. I was just saying when we were talking here, I'm like, is this my favorite main movie of his? Because I mean, I love Hitchcock's work, and I really want. I'm due for a revisit on a lot of it too, because after watching this one, I'm like, man, I can't remember how that Technicolor played, an aspect into his filmmaking, and how the suspense kind of was set up in some of his later works, and especially very early works, because he's been, I mean, this was right in the middle of his career. I think he has a very, long, multi-decade long career. So I think this might be, I mean, one of his best films. I was surprised. I liked Rear Window as much as I did on this rewatch, because I'd only seen it once before. And just watching it's just like, I think that there's technically everything that you'd want in a Hitchcock film. There's, you have that suspense, you have the isolation, you have the Technicolor, you have, these beautiful, like, long shots. You can just tell he has the budget he wants to really make it work. I mean, everything in this is kind of working besides his relationship. That's all I'm gonna say.
I mean, this is the start of his this is the start of his, like, peak, man. This is like when he's really hammering out those badass movies. Rear Window, and then he does Vertigo. Then he hits North by Northwest, and then Psycho. Like this is him. Like this is like full on Hitchcock. Kind of. And this is, I don't know. I know he was, he's making pictures in England, like first. So I don't know when he moves and started doing, like, a lot of American pictures. I'm not sure the time.
I wonder. I'm kind of wanting to. I'm not gonna, like, look that up, because I'm, like, kind of interested in that, because it's something I forgot, because I know this was Paramount, so he had moved to America whenever he made this. So I'm thinking,
and I know Rope was American, and that was like late 40s,
right?
And I mean, he was much more like experimental. I guess not experimental, but a little more heady when in his, like, earlier films, But like I said, when he hits his peak, man, in the 50s, he figured out how to appeal to a wide audience. He finally was able to go Hollywood, like, balls to the wall, and, fill the fucking seats. And then he, like you said, he became the master of suspense, I mean, like I hear my grandpa still talking about Hitchcock, and still to this day, like, throwing on a Hitchcock movie when it's on TV and being like, telling me about when remembers the first time he saw it. I love so that. Like there's a fucking impact with these movies, and like Chris was saying, the Rear Window has been duplicated several times. And plenty of his other movies are being duplicated, as like a blueprint for filmmaking. So that says a lot,
Let's not even talk about Psycho at that point, because we know how.
We haven't even. Yeah, exactly.
I don't think there's one single human being who liked that Psycho remake at all. But like you were saying, I actually saw the answer was the 40s. So he actually moved to started making American film in the 40s, which, as we were talking, Edwin mentioned, Chris mentioned, I mentioned, we all three mentioned how it kind of, like, really, like, again, put those asses in the seat, make some, like, high quality, almost like classic transatlantic style, dialogue driven, Americanized horror, not horror films, but I mean, like, suspense films or thriller films, at least a little bit of, like, romance, thrown in there as well. But again, what is that? That is, that's film noir. He's doing it again. Yeah. That's it. So
yeah. And why the fuck did everybody have bright blue eyes in this movie? Did you notice that?
Yeah, Jimmy Stewart, Grace Kelly, they're all like, and he kind of liked those characters like that, man. He had he had a model figure for his flicks, man. They're all like classic good looking people, you know.
Like I saw the blue eyes and like it caught me off guard. Like, hey, that person has blue eyes. That person has, and then I was like, I couldn't take my eyes. I just kept staring at everybody's eyes throughout the rest of the movie.
Chris,
I guarantee he did that on purpose. He did that shit on purpose for sure.
I mean, honestly, well, think about it. Like again, like we were talking, like making higher budget films, he was able to afford with his budget to get, first of all, James Stewart, which is one of the fucking like crazy ass expensive actors at the time that everybody was trying to get. And he was able to build sets and all this stuff. So at the end of the day, I'm sure that Paramount and Universal, as they collaborated on making various contracts with his films, I'm speculating here, but I would say that they were really trying to push the masses in the seat after that. You know what I mean? But like that's something about, yeah, for sure. But that's something about the film that really makes it interesting, is you have these like big name actors and stuff, and you have this coloration that we talk about, like Technicolor, which was extremely expensive at the time again. And within that we have this very small, tiny, one room voyeuristic story, you know what I mean? And
did you feel like the ending was very did you feel like the ending was very cartoonish when the killer enters his apartment and he has the flash bulbs and he's sitting in the chair and he flashes the bulb and the killer stops, adjusts his eyes, and then takes 2 steps, flash bulb, adjusts his eyes, and it does it like 4 times. Like after the second time, it became very cartoonish and almost funny.
I mean, yeah, I can see where you're coming from, but I think that kind of was meant to be almost. Would you say it was like almost like a suspenseful moment at the time, especially too? I mean, like it might be fun. I think by today's standards, maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, it came off a little silly to me. I mean, I still liked it, but it came off a little silly.
Like we talk about, what I could compare that probably to, and this might be a stretch because this is like polar opposites of films, but we talk about The Exorcist, for example. Today, whenever kids like Gen Z kids are watching The Exorcist, there's a lot to kind of laugh at. And I mean, hell, that fucking sequel, remake, whatever you want to fucking call it, was worth laughing at. But I mean, like the original film, whenever you're in the theater and you're watching that, I've seen rescreenings of that, and kids are almost like laughing at times. So it's just like there's something about the way culture was and the way that horror was made. And again, I could probably write an entire like fucking paper on this or something, and there's so much more to it. But I think basically just cultural differences between now and then in filmmaking was so much different. Like we had things that people would find like intense and scary in the 1950s is not going to translate the same way 70 years later. And it's something that's not really talked about a lot either. I don't know how you guys feel about it. I mean, I might want to get your opinion too.
Well, look at how it is now. Like everyone's desensitized for one, and all we do is like scroll through. I mean, all kids do is scroll through violence and depressing shit all day. They're like, oh, a fucking exorcist, like Christianity, paranoia, like that's not scary anymore,
True. I mean, dude, yeah, 100% with that. I think that you put it best too, because now I'm thinking about it. You know how I talked about Jacques Tourneur was really wanting to make a film that was more sensual and kind of like talked about relationships and sex, and he couldn't do that because of censorship issues. And obviously, I'm pretty sure that Alfred Hitchcock battled a lot of censorship issues as well, right?
Oh yeah, for sure.
I think one of his films even almost landed as like a video nasty later on. I forgot which one it was, but
Psycho.
I remember. Was that the video nasty?
Psycho I'm pretty the shower scene is what I'm not sure if that's the one that landed the video nasty, but the shower scene itself had a lot of controversy at that time, with it showing the half nude woman. This was what, 68, so you didn't have a lot of theatrical films back then that depicted so much nudity, even though there was nothing shown. Right. But it looked like there was.
I think that is part of the reason that black and white was utilized too, is because of the blood. They didn't want it to be red. Maybe I might be just pulling this out of my ass, but I feel like that could be. I feel like I remember hearing something about that. That one of the reasons that he chose black and white, because that was after Technicolor was already available, so he chose Psycho in black and white, and there is definitely a pretty aggressive stabbing sequence in the shower, and that's 1960. You know what I'm saying? So,
dude, no, Edwin, you're
yeah.
right. I remember reading something like that. Yeah, you're right on that. He chose
I've heard the same thing.
I can't remember if they couldn't like show the color and it was too much for people, or if they like said like no, you can't, or if he couldn't get the color right, and so he used what was like it was just straight up used chocolate syrup.
Chocolate
syrup.
Yeah, I think
it wasn't even dyed or anything. It was just straight up chocolate syrup. But there's no blood in Rear Window at all, is there? Because like I don't think that there's no blood at all, nothing at all. So it's just like one of those things where this is like just 6 years later. 6 years earlier.
There's a dead dog. That's the only thing. The only type of violence is the dead dog, and like a strangulation type deal, like where he's trying to strangle the girl in the apartment.
Yeah.
I mean, dead dog. That's nothing back then. We don't have the.
it's not a
totally fine.
answer or anything.
So that's the second movie. We're talking about two movies right here that have dead animals in them. You know what I'm saying? They loved doing that shit back then. Like fuck them animals.
No. That's hilarious.
Man, this is what Diodato watched before he made Cannibal Holocaust.
That's where he got his ideas from. Watching American movies.
He was like, that's it. That's what I want to do right there.
What was your favorite scene? Favorite shot, favorite scene from the movie at all?
It's gonna sound crazy because mine's from the first 5 minutes, but it's where we first get introduced to all the characters. I mean, it's the entire courtyard and you see that heat wave. And I think whenever I mean, it's gonna sound again cliche to say, but it's like cinema. Like whenever you see the shot of the thermometer, and then you see the shots of the people and the dude sitting outside of his sleeping outside of his on his balcony outside of his apartment. That's what I was looking for, the apartment.
Man, I think that's my favorite scene too. Like when he's staring at everyone, he's like, there's this part where he's looking at that the blonde babe across the way, and she's doing the split and stuff like that, and I love that. It's just you really get to see into James Stewart's boredom in this film. So I think that's my favorite scene too, and is this the setup for everything that's going on, because it really just that you get thrown into the movie right then and there.
And his girlfriend wants hook up with him so bad, but he's so busy just looking at other people that he has no interest. She gets
pissed off at him.
Yeah, pay attention to me. I'm over here, and he's like, she's over there. This person.
I like how he basically says that we're not supposed to be together. I don't want to be with you anymore. And she's like, fine, we're through until tomorrow night.
Yeah.
Oh, good.
But my favorite scene, I really enjoyed the moment when the girlfriend and the maid go out of the apartment and go to dig up the flower bed and to try to find whatever is hidden underneath the flower bed, because I mean it drew a lot of intense moments. I was on the edge of my seat. The anticipation of, are they going to get caught? Who's going to catch them? What's going to happen? I didn't expect her to just bail and just climb up the ladder and just jump to the window. I didn't expect that at all. So I was very shocked that she would do that. And I just really enjoyed that moment. It was a lot of fun.
I too love the flower bed scene a lot. That was going to be my other choice.
For sure. And I think that, the direction of this, I mean, it's hard to even pick a scene because the entire thing is just so tailored, and you can really just feel each and every thing had a place to it. Every single scene, every single person, every single character played a very important role. And that's kind of where it comes down to social commentary almost. You know what I mean? It's just at the time you're seeing all these different people live their lives, and he feels as if he doesn't have that anymore. I mean, that's how I interpret it, at least. And I mean, that's kind of untrue because his girlfriend's literally over there, pay attention to me, like I mentioned. So yeah, I mean, it's hard to pick that scene because you just you feel like you're just living through his lens. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and it perfectly wraps up too, because like we were talking about the opening scene, you see everybody, and then Jeff goes through all this shit watching them, getting obsessed with the guy murdering his wife. And then it ends with not only Jeff's story getting wrapped up, but every single character that he was looking at the beginning wrapping up to, like, their own arc went full circle. Like the people with the dead dog got a puppy now, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I think that's a pretty cool aspect too, to go along with the voyeurism aspect.
For sure.
There's only one negative that I could say about the film, and the fact that he's a photographer and he grabs his camera and is looking through his camera lens the entire time at the would-be killer and is not taking one single damn picture.
Yeah, I never really thought about that. Why didn't he snap a picture? You know what I'm saying?
It kept pissing me off. I was yelling at that. I was just like, take a picture, take the picture, take it.
Maybe he couldn't get a good shot or something. I don't know. Maybe he's like, this is not the one.
It's that suspense, Chris. He was wanting to keep you waiting on that picture.
I thought that's what was going to happen. I thought he was going to take pictures and he was going to end up winning or getting that job or whatever, or getting a raise at his job because of the, he solved the mystery of the murder and got evidence and turned it into his job, and it just didn't play out that way. Thought it was odd.
Well, overall, what do you think for your rating, Chris? What would you give this?
Like I said, this was a first time watch. I don't know how I missed it, but a lot of these older films I haven't had a chance to check out, and I gave this movie an 8 out of 10. I thought it was a lot of fun. It was very intense. It's another one of those movies that everyone talked about earlier with, it's being driven by dialogue. And this one has a mix. You're driven by dialogue, but you're also driven by the voyeurism of it. You want to see him looking out the window. Anytime that he's not looking out the window, you're kind of wanting to go back so you can see everybody that's what's happening to them at the moment. And I thoroughly enjoyed it. I wanted it to be a little longer. I was happy with the outcome. You want him to be victorious, and he is. And I really enjoyed it, and I could understand why that the story went on to be duplicated multiple times and throughout history of horror films. Great film.
Well said. And I mean, dude, I want to go perfect 10. Perfect 10 for me all around. There's nothing really. I mean, of course, you can like nitpick and gripe about, here and there scenes, but really, obviously, I mean, it's just perfection in every way. It's absolutely beautiful storytelling, beautifully done, suspenseful. It's great in every way. I really love it. All right. So moving on to one of my personal favorite serial killer movies of all time. And I really, really love this one. We're talking 2007, David Fincher, Zodiac.
Zodiac was my job. It's not yours.
He's still out there, Dave.
Killing is his compulsion. It drives him. It's in his blood.
Jeez.
What?
Squirrels.
This is the Zodiac speaking.
I have a gun. I can give you a lift to the service station.
Do you always go around helping people in the night?
I'm not the Zodiac. And if I was, I certainly wouldn't tell you.
Are you sure there's nobody else in the house?
I fucking love this film so much. And I know that me and Edwin was talking, he loves serial killer movies as well. And this is definitely no exception to Zodiac. I find a lot of fascination with. And again, this is kind of going back to film school Tyler again. I remember having this obsession with David Fincher. And I watched The Social Network, which he had actually made as well. And he had such meticulous style. It was almost, I don't even know how to describe it. It's almost down to David Lynch style, like filmmaking as how particular he is. So he like imports like fucking oak trees and like has them planted in California. I don't know if you guys have heard of this, but like the Zodiac is like, he wanted it to be the murder. I mean, this is just like it's crazy how much like work he put into making this exactly right. I know a lot of people consulted. Actually, I forgot to mention, I have the book right here. So this Zodiac book, it's actually who was it? Robert Graysmith?
Yeah, that book rules, man.
Dude, it's fucking awesome. I'm getting ahead of myself because I'm so excited to talk about this. But Robert Graysmith wrote this book. There is eyewitnesses. There are people who had been victims. Different people who are still alive today. I forgot which ones are still alive now, but they actually consulted for the Zodiac film, which was based off of this book. And I think it's really interesting because they went all out, like I said, down to the point where they wanted to ship in oak trees and plant them in California just to make sure that the police sketches were exact, because they had access to all the police sketches, which I think is crazy. So how technically complex this is, I mean, it's fantastic. I guess we can start with like the opening, which I absolutely love. It's what is it, the Lover's Lane, a murder, which well done.
Mm-hmm.
No, you go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, so you have a movie that dives into the world of a serial killer, and immediately you have Jake Gyllenhaal, you have Robert Downey Jr., Mark Ruffalo, you have all of these amazing actors in this film, and I mean, you cannot get a better cast together to create this film. This was absolutely perfect casting down to every single character, in my opinion.
Yeah, a hard agree on that one. And I think I think Downey does a great job. He's kind of like the Rust Cole from True Detective of Zodiac. He is like super obsessed with the story. I really love his character. He is like the definition of a noir character to me in this film. So I think Downey is a favorite of mine. Definitely just a great casted film, great looking film too.
Dude, I'm glad you said that too, because if you look at this style, it's completely different from our last two. I think this is like when we get into like the neo-noir kind of vibe. It's not necessarily a noir film, it's more towards like just true crime. But at the end of the day, it has like all those traits that we knew previously. So I'm glad that was a nice call out there, because I think that's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, you get a mix with the detective side of what's going on, a mix with the killer side of what's going on, because you see the killings take place, and so you know what happens, and then you jump into the investigation side of it as well. So that's where the noir part, I think, really hits its mark. But that opening scene is, I mean, right off the bat, you're just shocked. You get in the car, and it's just gunshot straight to the face, killing two people immediately. It really sets the tone for what you're getting into. And I mean, right off the bat, you're hooked.
So what I think that really makes this movie kind of fall, I feel like it's one of the better examples of a horror noir, because you have all the archetypes here. So you have you have the people that are investigating, the team at the San Francisco Chronicle, which I think is really cool, because Graysmith is a cartoonist that gets involved and becomes obsessed. So I really like when they use main characters in the investigation. They're not necessarily a cop or a reporter. You know, he's just the cartoonist, but he also drags in Paul Avery, which is Downey's character, and they get entangled into this. And what makes it not just a noir, a neo-noir, and more of the horror elements, is that the Zodiac killer is not just a serial killer. He's writing these cryptic messages and taunting the San Francisco Chronicle. And it's almost got this, like, since he's using these cryptic messages, it almost has this occult aspect. And even his outfit that he's wearing, the Zodiac, when he kills them, he's wearing the mask. There is this very like occult, ritualistic murder that is going on and I feel like that really pushes it towards the realm of horror, more so than a lot of other movies that could be categorized as horror noir.
That's interesting you say that. I'm actually thinking about that now because that outfit is, and I heard that his outfit that he wore in the movie was, I guess, an exact replica of what eyewitnesses have described. And I'm like, this is not even home with the film, but it's just like, what was what did he have? I mean, obviously, like horror, not horror, but serial killers don't really have motives a lot of times. But like, what the fuck was his motive? You know what I mean? Is he a cult? Is this kind of like can we say this is a cult movie at that point?
Well, you've read the book. Graysmith suggests that, and the movie follows the book.
It does
so well. It really does. I mean, there's definitely a lot of liberties, especially with Paul Avery's character. Kind of how obsessed he got into it. But the movie follows a lot of the book very well, and there's a suggestion that maybe there is a group of Zodiac killers out there, and maybe it is some kind of cult ritual killing. And something that really kind of lingers is that there's never any answers. And that is something that really, really makes a noir, is that there is no resolution, because right and wrong are not what we're looking for here. We're not looking for resolution in this story, because we're left with answers. And that's what, leaves us obsessed as the main characters. That's what we become Paul Avery. We become Robert Graysmith. We become obsessed with the Zodiac Killer, just like everyone else does.
I think one of the reasons why we get so involved as well is because they throw all the information out there. Everything that you question about what's happening, who it could be, why they're doing it, it's brought up. There's even a brief moment where they talk about, hey, maybe this person is schizophrenic. And then they have the person like, well, if he was schizophrenic, he wouldn't write with the same form of writing that he has as his self. It would be a different writing because the mind works in different ways like that. But you're led to believe so many different theories, so many different people, and you don't know which one to investigate, just like the investigators in real life. You don't know that either. So you're just as invested, and you're wanting to find out who it is and who you think it might be, as much as the people on screen.
Yes, 100%, 100%. And that's I think that's what makes this movie so entrancing. Which also, that to me, applies to the occult aspect, because like the occult is supposed to, it works beneath the surface of reality, and it's things that you don't see happening. I think this film really, really has something, below the surface that you're not seeing on screen. And most of the scariest parts of this movie are not things that you actually see. It's things that you're thinking about. For example, when they interview the dude that they think is the killer, he's got the
Lee Arthur Lee,
yeah,
or Lee Arthur, I think, or whatever his first name is. Yeah,
you're like, this guy. It all points to him, but then it's like one thing throws you off, and then the rest of the movie, you're thinking like, how can that not be him? It's like almost like a spell's been cast, And then I think the scariest scene of all is when Graysmith goes to the guy who does the posters. He's looking for the posters of the guy who has the films, and he's in the basement. Holy shit, that scene is scary as hell.
I was about ready to mention that because that's my favorite scene. I'll let you go on that one, because I think this is a good
well,
scene.
You've read the book, and it's scary like that in the book too. That's my favorite part in the book, because he's talking about, he hears the creaking in the floor above him. And then in the movie, I don't remember if it's in the book too, but in the movie, he says something about the posters, and the guy's like, well, that's impossible. He's like, I draw all the posters. And then you're like, oh fuck, that's the guy. And then he says something. Gyllenhaal says something, or Grace. Yeah, what's he ask? He asks something.
Yeah, he says, "Is there somebody else in the house? Is there
Mhm.
somebody upstairs?" And he's never given an answer. The guy won't tell him anything.
Oh man, I'm getting chills thinking about it right here.
Yeah.
I'm like alone in my office. I'm like, that shit is scary, man.
Dude, he like does it just like fuck with him almost too. It's like very much just like, in your face kind of stuff. It's just like, hey, I need to get out of here. That's kind of like his like MO. And he's like, and that scene where like the part of the scene where he runs up and he tries to leave and the door's locked and you're like, oh shit, is this it? You know what I mean? Is this what's happening?
Yeah, as he's running up the stairs, because you think you hear the same thing he hears, somebody walking. So he's like, "I'm going to leave now." And he runs up the stairs. At every corner that he passes by, you just think that something's going to happen, that somebody's going to reach out, attack him, or hit him every single corner he takes until he gets to the door where he's greeted by the same guy who was just in the basement.
Mm-hmm.
It's truly like it doesn't get more horrifying than that, suspenseful. And then the movie's left open-ended. You get to Graysmith tracks, doesn't he goes to Alan again, and they just like kind of like share this kind of like empty gaze. He you never find out if it was him or not.
Exactly.
So it's just you're left at the same point you were at the beginning. Nothing is resolved. Nothing has no answers have been given. And honestly, by the end of the movie, you're left lonelier. You're left let down. And I think that the bleakness of this ending is what makes it a noir so very well. I think the bleakness really, really is captured. And that's what I'm always looking for in noir films, is that bleak ending. I love it.
No, yeah, I'm actually looking at the way the book ends because I'm like, I think that they end the same way, essentially.
Yeah, I think the book was like, I remember the book and the movie because I read the book and then I watched I saw the movie years before I ever read the book. I saw it when it came out. And then when I read the book, it was like maybe like 5 or 6 years ago, I watched the movie after and I was like, damn, that's like spot on.
Yeah.
Fincher did a great job.
The first time I watched the movie, I went into it not knowing anything about the Zodiac because it was one of the fewer serial killers that I knew anything about. And I didn't know how accurate the film was based on actual historical, documents. And I started researching it and then watching it again now, going back and finding more stuff online and researching some more. It's very close with everything that was said throughout the investigation. It's almost spot on.
Well, dude, no, I mean, they had people like, I know that throughout this book, there are many different people throughout the Zodiac case that is mentioned. And I know that whoever's still alive, I forgot which ones are still alive today, off the top of my head, but I know they all served as advisors. So Fincher himself loved the book. He hired a bunch of people who collaborated on publishing this book. I know that they got full access to all the police files, to all the police sketches, any kind of like leads they have, everything about the Zodiac, they basically were able to lay out in front of them. So Fincher being insufferable as a filmmaker as he is, which is he's fucking genius at it though. I mean, you can't say anything else, but the guy is so cutthroat when it comes to filmmaking. I fucking love him to death. But the thing is like, he just knows his shit. And like, if he takes on a film, he's going to make sure that it's absolutely meticulously combed through every little detail when he goes out to release it. So they had tons of people that was on this film and they spent so much money. I think, I just looked it up while we were talking a second ago. $85 million was the budget, which is extremely expensive. And that was just essentially because they wanted everything to look exactly the way it was in the police sketches and the pieces of information from the book, from the eyewitness accounts, and from all the people who consulted. So I mean, this is about as real as it gets. And when it comes down to like film noir, this is a detective story at the end of the day. So like that's it. I mean, like we see these, unsolved cases. Like this is a crazy ass unsolved case, probably the one. And that's why it fits so perfectly in with seeing eyewitness accounts, I guess you would say. And that's what I think is so fucking creepy about the Zodiac killer, is just the fact that the guy
he could be out there, but I mean, that I think you're right, man. I think this is just a really solid noir film by a great director. And you're saying, he might be, a hard ass, but that's what it takes to make a great film. I think you can't have any like half-assery when you're making a flick like this. I mean, what director can you think of with their best movies? I'm sure they were a prick in some sense. You know what I mean? But he has a vision. Fincher had a vision, and he definitely pulled it off. Perfectly. I think
He did I forgot what scene it was, but he did over 100 takes. He did 99 takes, and some scenes were 120, 130 takes just to get one piece correct. And he would basically just say hey, we're filming this strain of dialogue, and this is all going to be just one take, and we're just doing it. We're not having any cuts at all. And he would just run it over and over and over till it was perfect. And as you mentioned, I mean, it pays off. And I think it's the sign of a craftsman. You know what I mean? You see a true craft with Fincher. He knows his style, very shallow depth of field in terms of cinematography, very quick-witted dialogue. I mean, it's brilliant, not only for the fact that it's about the Zodiac Killer, which is, I mean, the story is done so well, but technical, a technical aspect. The thing is a masterpiece. You know what I mean? A technical and a story-wise a masterpiece.
definitely, and you look at we were talking about how Rear Window, the set, is a role in itself. I think San Francisco is a role in itself in this too. California in general. I think that's and Fincher, I'm sure you know this, that a lot of those scenes, the backgrounds were used with computer generated. He had a set and then added the depth and the fogginess and all that stuff to kind of stage this stage the set itself to kind of be menacing along with what is going on, and it kind of gave it that more noir aspect. He basically turned the story of the Zodiac into an actual noir, which I think is pretty interesting too. Yeah,
it's fucking cool. Yeah, I mean, I know on the Social Network, for example, he took the Winklevoss twins and put the face over what is it, Army Hammer they chose, and they had two different actors, and he was like, well, we could just keep their face normal looking and just let it kind of go that way. But he was like, no, the Winklevoss twins have to be more identical than what these actors look. So they digitally scanned Army Hammer's face and then plastered it on the other one because he wanted it to be just a little bit different to make them look more identical than Fraternal, because that's how the story was supposed to go.
I didn't know that. That's crazy.
Yeah, dude, it's fucking nuts. So
and I'm pretty anti CGI, but when a person like Fincher can use it in a good way, I can respect that a lot.
Yeah, and I think that, I mean, talking on the horror roots too, Zodiac, I mean, we had already spoke on this before too. Zodiac's actually fucking scary. Scarier than Rear Window, even with the time period differences in effect. Scarier than Cat People, honestly. And it kind of does. I mean, it's not anything like Cat People, but it kind of does have similar themes in terms what you were saying, Edwin, to kind of how it has almost a weird cult undertone, how you can kind of put it in as a cult. So I think that's something that's kind of interesting too. It's just maybe we need to look at horror noir as having a weird kind of undertone of cult deep in the subtext, way deep in the subtext. It's just is this 100%. Considered horror? But yeah,
I think the occult aspect too is what I mean, I'm drawn to occult things, anything that is
folky.
Yeah, I love that. I think it makes it scarier. I mean, and things that are left unanswered is always better to me too. So yeah, definitely think that movie kind of hits all those spots.
Dude, off topic completely from Zodiac, but while we're talking about folk, there's actually Severin Films put out a box set like 2 years ago now. I don't know if you have it or not. It's like what is it called? Woodland Days, and no, it's that's actually
The documentary.
All the Haunts Be Ours. Is that what it is? I don't know if you guys have got that or not, but it's a whole fucking like complete series of, I guess, folk stories, and I've went through that twice now, and I fucking love
that documentary, that long ass documentary.
Yeah, like 3.5 hours.
Is that the one? Yes, I fucking love that documentary.
That is comprehensive as shit, and not only is it comprehensive as shit, it's genius in every way. I feel complete watching it. Like, they did not leave anything out. Love that. But also they have that set, like Severin put out a set with that in it, and they have like 14 other horror films attached, and it's a fantastic set. Zodiac should be in there. Honestly, now we're talking.
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, fuck, just throw Zodiac in there for good measure at the end. So we already talked about the scene where the basement, that's my favorite scene. I guess we'll talk about any other scenes that stood out before we move on and close the film up, because there are so much to it. Do you guys have any other like favorite moments?
Edwin already talked about. Go ahead, Edwin.
No, go ahead. Which one were we? No, you're good. Yeah.
I was just going to say, you'd already brought up this. My favorite scene is the scene where they're interviewing Lee Arthur for the very first time, and they're asking him for his watch. And you see that the Zodiac sign is on the watch. It's a Zodiac watch. And he brings up topics that they weren't even asking him about. They start saying something to him, and he just, like, out of nowhere, just be like, well, the knives in my car had blood on them. I've already told the other officers about it. Like, it was just very conspicuous about everything. That's my single favorite scene from the movie.
I love both of those scenes, and then I also love when Graysmith goes to visit Avery, and Avery is just like totally washed up, drunk, and the Zodiac has destroyed his life. I think that's just an awesome, powerful scene, and Robert Downey Jr. plays it so well. And I love to see how a case can destroy someone because of their obsession. And you think, did the Zodiac, is it the Zodiac's power over him, or is it just his own human obsession? You don't really know either.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's beautiful. I think I never really looked in that scene like deeply, but I think that my two favorite are the ones that we had discussed with the watch and the basement scene. Just being creepy and fucking weird, obviously it's just nuts. But I mean, I think...
also too, like, if you bring in like the other two, unlike the other two movies, this one pushes 3 hours for a time frame.
That's a good point. Yeah.
I don't know what it was about this viewing of it, but this was my second viewing watching it, and it flew by. Like, it felt like it lasted about an hour. I was so interested. I was so involved. I was, every moment that you're supposed to be on your edge of your seat for the basement scene, all of that, I was there. I was right in, and I did not want the movie to end, but it ended quicker than I thought it was. I literally thought I was been watching it for about an hour, and it was done.
Well, I think it kind of comes down to like the Zodiac murder is huge. Like, this thing is like, it's a huge case, but you take something that is very personal to these characters, and these characters are real life people, and it's almost, again, you get a very like small lens glimpse into their life. Like, you get super in depth, and I think that it's just like following these guys around, like trying to fucking figure out what the hell's going on, and the twists and turns that Fincher puts into there, and all that together just kind of like makes it work. Like, it's a perfect way to tell it. It's much better than just like saying like, hey, this is the Zodiac killer. Here's the detective trying to figure out the case. We're just going to, BS our way through it, and then at the end not give a payoff or anything. But this film is like, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to, we're going to go very personal with these characters. We're going to go all the way to the very end, and we're not going to get the payoff that we wanted. But, we do get the payoff, I think. Even though it's an open-ended story, we get that. And I think that's why it's so satisfying to watch, why it goes so quickly, and why it's a technical achievement on top of being a fantastic film. You know what I mean?
For sure.
So, Chris, what would be what's your rating for this one?
I gave this movie a 9 out of 10. The first time I watched it, I knew nothing about the Zodiac. I gave it a 7. And this time around, after doing research, getting back involved with the movie again, it flew by. I was more interested. I was more intrigued, and it was more personal to me, I guess, maybe because I knew some of the story behind it. And I loved it this time around. I mean, I really liked it the first time, but this time I was even more into it. So
Dude,
I gave it a 9.
Because me and you had talked about it before, and you were like, I really liked the movie, but I had some problems with it. So now I'm glad, now that we kind of like rewatched it, it kind of it is. I mean, I think I liked it even more than the last time. So I gave it a 9 out of 10. So I think that's definitely right. I'm right there with you, and I feel the exact same way in terms of the second watch, because I think I gave it an 8 out of 10 the last time I watched it. So to recap, Chris and me, Chris gave a 7 out of 10 to Cat People. I gave a 9 out of 10. Chris gave an 8 out of 10 to Rear Window, right? And then I gave a 10 out of 10. And then for Zodiac, Chris gave a 9 out of 10. I also gave a 9 out of 10. None of that matters because at the end of the day, Edwin is going to pick third, second, and first place. Do you have any idea what you're going to do, Edwin? You still thinking?
Oh, no, man. I had my decision from the jump.
Hell yeah. Sweet. Okay. So we could take it. Let's do it. So in third place.
All right. Third place is definitely Rear Window.
What? I was not expecting that.
Son of a bitch.
Yep.
Dude, give that like a 10 out of 10. So in terms of like that in comparison to the other two films, why did you choose it for third?
Because I think these ratings are the way we're eliminating, the way I'm eliminating is not based on how good the film is. I love fucking Rear Window. It's a 10 out of 10 movie. But in terms of like what makes a horror noir for me, I think it succeeds the least in what kind of compiles that. I think it's more along the lines of a suspense thriller rather than a straight up noir and a horror movie. So that's why I put it in third place.
Yeah, fuck you, Chris.
You know what? Fuck
I didn't
Mike.
say that. I didn't say that, Chris. Tyler did.
Well, I'm just gonna say fuck Mike because he's not even here and he already beat me.
That's hilarious.
No, you make valid points with it. You get more of a suspense, more of a mystery than a noir film, which I mean it's valid. I don't disagree with you. It sucks that I'm losing, but I don't disagree.
Well, it's a happy ending too. It wraps up in a happy ending. Everybody's, there's no loose ends in this film. So that's why I kind of put it towards that's why he gets third place.
And it's really tough for Edwin too, because at the end of the day, this is the first show that I've had 3 solid picks. Like I've always hated one of them and liked the other 2 to some degree. But this one is like, it's fucking hard to pick. Like these are really good films. All of them are. So like when you say third place, it's like trying to like say like, hey, what was the one that, was fucking a masterpiece, but at the same time, not as good as the other 2. So it's almost impossible to even pick. But I think it's fair. I think these are valid. So who is the winner of Fright Fights?
The winner is Zodiac.
Hey!
Oh, wait. Yeah.
Mike wins. Are you fucking kidding me?
And then the reason why is because so Cat People is more of a horror film rather than a noir. What makes it noir to me is that you focus on like we were talking about the technical aspects, some of the cinematography. There's a lot of chiaroscuro, dark shadows. It definitely falls into that category. And I think the femme fatale it's a great example of a femme fatale. But I think Zodiac fully encapsulates what a noir is, and what horror is, because there is the serial killer using these complex codes and ciphers to taunt the people investigating it, and then the investigators don't win in the end. They're still they come out lesser people than they were in the beginning, and I think that's what makes a noir is that these characters, no matter how archetyped they are, no matter how much you could plug in Sam Spade, you could plug in you could plug in Philip Marlowe, you could plug in Russ Cole, you could plug in all these other noir characters, and in the end they're all still going to lose in the end, and with a bleak ending. That's always a solid pick for me. I think Zodiac fully encaptures what a horror noir is. So,
dude, I'll be honest. I did not see that coming. It's a great great pick. I just think that's good. I mean,
I'm glad I could surprise everyone.
What the fuck is this, Edwin? No, I'm kidding. No, I think that's actually very valid. I think you bring up some really good points. And defending Zodiac, I mean, I think that everybody that watched Zodiac in this room, or rewatched it, loved it this time. Like, we really truly can see the craft at work there. And I mean, Cat People, I think, is a very worthy second as well. And I think I'm very happy with the end result. I think that now that we've rediscussed it as a whole, that kind of all falls into place perfectly. First place going to Zodiac, second place going to Cat People, and third place going to Rear Window. So I think that's
and all those movies are 10s, man. All those movies are 10s. And here's the crazy thing is that when you gave me these movies, I was like, man, I have literally seen these movies all like 100 times, and I fucking love them.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's something that I could totally naturally just bullshit about, because I've already, these are top movies for me. I think they're they're definitely on my top list of favorite movies. So like I said, the decisions weren't based on merit in terms of quality. It was based on what makes a horror noir to me. So I think they're great picks, and I think they're great fucking films, regardless of how the winnings came out.
For sure. And before we even close that one up, do you want to I know this is something that you picked, Edwin, the horror noir. I had a great time doing. I'm glad you came on. But what would be, for our listeners, what would you say some of the top horror noir films that you would recommend that they go out and see immediately, like some of your favorite noirs?
There are two that come to mind perfectly to me as what a horror noir should be. There's a film called Angel Heart, starring Mickey Rourke as the main character, and Robert De Niro as the antagonist. It is the perfect blend of horror and noir. It is a private investigator mystery, and basically, things unravel and it's not what it seems. Second would be True Detective season 1. I think it's the most perfect pieces of horror and crime that there ever could be and ever will be. Russ Cole is the definition of a noir archetype. It's got everything, occult stuff. I mean, it's a badass movie. Other honorable mentions are Lord of Illusions, the Clive Barker film. It's a great private investigator movie. Awesome horror. The Believers is another occult kind of mystery. So those are some really good ones.
I haven't seen The Believer.
Is that the 90s film? Is that the one from the 90s?
It's Martin Sheen. I think it's late 80s.
Late 80s, okay.
Yeah, it's like 87. It's a really, really good horror noir. Trying to think of another one. Wolfen, if you've ever seen Wolfen, Wolfen's a really good one based on Whitley Strieber book. Mulholland Drive, Lost Highway, Shutter Island. Yeah, those are probably my ones that I'd say go see. But yeah, definitely Angel Heart if you can track down Angel Heart. Manhunter. I don't know if any of you seen Manhunter. Michael Mann's
Angel Heart's
film.
genius too, and Lord of Illusions probably Clive Barker's best film he ever made.
Oh, for sure.
The best
Yeah,
film he ever made.
yeah, hands down. So yeah, there's a lot out there. There's a lot of really good flicks out there. Um, and even in fiction, there's a lot of great fiction out there. A lot of great books. There's a book by Brian Evanson called Last Days. It's a badass noir mystery. It's written like something that Raymond Chandler would write. There's a series by Laird Barron called the Isaiah Coleridge series. Blood Standard, Black Mountain, and Worse Angels. Great horror noir, private investigator shit. So there's a ton of stuff out there.
For sure, man. Those are some great picks. And if our listeners wanted to reach out to you on social media or follow you, where would they go to?
Yeah, so I would suggest I'm on Twitter a lot, Instagram. Just look up Gravely Unusual. I'm on there. I'm always talking shit on there, mostly on Twitter. So find me on there. And you might unfollow me because I talk a lot of shit, but it's mostly just about movies and books. I also have a Substack where I post like my essays and reviews and fiction. It's called Pessimisticism, and it's under Edwin Callihan. I think just look me up on Substack. If you find my social medias, I have a link on there. And you can also follow Castagnie Publishing on Twitter and Instagram. And we also have a Big Cartel, Castagnie Publishing.bigcartel.com, where you can buy all of our books and things like that.
For sure. Do you guys have any books coming out soon?
Yeah, we have a Western horror coming out called The Winnowing Draw by Michael Tichy. It's just a phenomenal book. It's like if Cormac McCarthy had cryptids in his book. Just a great piece of fiction, a brilliant novel, really. And then I have a collection coming out, my first short story collection called The Histories of Magot. It's all kind of Ligotti. There's a lot of horror. There's a horror noir story in there. A lot like Ligotti and Lovecraft, mixed with a lot of crime elements, a lot of Appalachian elements. And that should be out at the end of January. So yeah, definitely check that out.
For sure. I mean, I 100% would urge everybody to check it out because I've read some of your stuff and it's a fucking. I've never seen so many like different kind of genres being able to be meshed together, and some of the stuff that you've written. I absolutely love all your work. So I definitely
thank you, man. I
urge
appreciate
the viewers
that.
to check it out for sure. Yeah, and of course we are on Facebook. Join our Facebook group, our Twitter. We are also on the Slasher app. Follow us on Letterboxd. Chris, it's been awesome. Edwin, it's been awesome. Everybody who's been listening here, we love y'all. Reach out to us if you have any questions. We want to chat some horror. Peace out. Have a good night.